welcome to meeting number 33 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on National Defence. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, December 9th, 2025, the committee is meeting to study the appointment of the Chief Executive Officer of the Defence Investment Agency. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format. Before we continue, I ask participants to consult the guidelines on the table. These measures are there to help prevent audio and feedback incidences and to protect the health and safety of our interpreters. And as we proceed, please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. And for interpretation, it's available on your earpiece by selecting the appropriate language channel. And as a reminder, comments should be addressed through the chair. Before we begin, I'd also like to acknowledge that we have a former Chair of Defense and Minister of Defense watching us here in our audience today, Mr. David Pratt. Welcome to the committee and your old stomping grounds. So let's begin with the witnesses. From the Defense Investment Agency, Doug Guzman, our Chief Executive Officer, Linda Drainville, Chief Financial Officer, and Vincent Robitaille, is that correctly? Robitaille, the Assistant Deputy Minister of Procurement. And we'll proceed with our opening statements. Over to you, Mr. Guzman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and honourable members of the committee. Avant de commencer, je tiens à souligner que nous nous réunissons.
Before beginning, I'd like to underline that we are gathered on the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. I'm happy to be here today to talk to you about the creation of the Defense Investment Agency. I am joined today by my colleagues, our Chief Financial Officer and Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Linda Drainville, and the Assistant Deputy Minister of Procurement, Vincent Robitaille.
Announced the creation of the Defence Investment Agency to serve a dual purpose, to modernize and streamline Canada's defence procurement system and to ensure that Canada's significantly increased level of defence investment is directed in a way that delivers economic, strategic and sovereign benefits. I was appointed CEO effective November 12th, 2025. Growing global uncertainty and complexity underscore the need to properly equip the Canadian Armed Forces and effectively support the Canadian Coast Guard. The need has never been greater. At its core, the work of the DIA is about sovereignty, both militarily and economically. It's about ensuring that the Canadian Armed Forces have the capabilities they need to protect Canada while also building a strong, secure and resilient defence system for all Canadians. Defence procurement is not only about acquiring equipment, it is a powerful lever for economic growth. By strengthening our domestic industrial base, supporting Canadian companies, and fostering innovation, we are ensuring that investments in defence generate long-term benefits for Canadians. I joined the public service after a long career in business because Canada is at a pivotal moment. If I have the experience and ability to help our country, then I feel an obligation to do so. My 35-year business career has not centered on procurement, but it has featured leadership of new organizations, as well as large global ones, familiarity with deal structuring and investments, and experience investing capital of all kinds, public and private equity, sovereign wealth, as well as a wide range of commercial and government participants, both domestic and global. All of that experience is relevant to the DIA. Improving how Canada delivers defence capability is urgent. The recently released Defence Industrial Strategy is the North Star for our mandate in that regard. Its strategy is clear, with the build, partner, buy approach. We will build in Canada where it is essential to maintain sovereign capability and where we have the ability to do so. Where we cannot build alone, we will partner with trusted allies to jointly develop advanced capabilities and systems. And where it makes sense to buy, we will do so quickly, efficiently, and with a clear focus on benefits to Canada. The approach is supported by a greater emphasis on innovation, support for small and medium-sized businesses, supply chain security, and alignment with NATO and NORAD modernization objectives. Our role is to execute on these principles while keeping the operational needs of the Canadian Armed Forces front and center. As I'm sure we'll talk about more in questions, the agency has moved quickly and is already delivering early results. In a short period, we have advanced major procurements and awarded significant contracts to Canadian suppliers. This includes a strategic partnership with Telesat and MDA Space for the Enhanced Satellite Communication project to build world-class satellite communications, accelerating procurement timelines by up to 2 years and creating export opportunities for Canada. We also recently awarded a contract to Colt Canada for the Canadian Modular Assault Rifle, delivering that capability also approximately 2 years faster while directly supporting Canadian industry. As we speak, we are advancing one of the most complex procurements in Canadian history, the Canadian Patrol Submarine Project, applying a more commercial and outcomes-focused approach. Canada's submarines will be in the water years earlier than would have previously been the case. This progress reflects a deliberate shift in how we operate through earlier engagement with industry, faster decision-making, and a focus on delivering capability while maximizing economic benefit here in Canada. I accepted this role because I believe Canada must and can do better in how we deliver defense capability. My focus is on measurable improvements in timelines, stronger accountability, and better outcomes for the Canadian forces, and ultimately for all Canadians. Monsieur le Président, occuper une fonction
Mr.
officielle.
Chair, serving in public office is a privilege, and I welcome the opportunity to address your questions, and unfortunately, most of the time I will have to answer in English.
I'm not sure if this mic has been on. We are going to proceed our first round of questioning, and we'll start with Mr. Bazan for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to welcome our witnesses, especially Mr. Guzman, who has been able to join us after a couple of hits and misses, but glad you're with us today. So you mentioned that you don't have any procurement experience in your resume. Do you have any defense experience?
I've advised defense companies in the course of my career.
Which companies?
I've not served. I don't know if it's a public matter, but large.
It is public matter if you're awarding contracts to companies that you've actually advised.
Large Canadian companies, large U.S. primes over the course of a 30-year business career.
So how are you going to ensure that companies that you have consulted with or provided advice on in the past aren't favored in this process? Do you own stocks and shares in them as defined by your disclosure statement to the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner?
So those sort of two-part question there on the conflicts of interest and fully in compliance with all the rules. What I am permitted.
But sometimes that's not good enough.
What I'm permitted to own outside of the trust structure, I own an open-ended mutual funds. So by definition, there are likely stocks of all kinds of companies in those open-ended mutual funds. What I'm not permitted to own directly is obviously in a blind trust. I, over the course of my career, advised or financed probably thousands of companies. And so the relationship with those companies is in the past. The nature of the process that we engage in is designed to be fair, open, and transparent. It is now being complicated in a good way for Canada by layering on Buy Canadian. And we have a mandate in our selection process to consider more things than we used to, not just price, contract, service, and timing, but also benefits to Canada, sovereignty to Canada, IT sovereignty. And so it's a more complicated process, but it's designed.
But you can understand that, not only based upon what you've got in blind trust now, that you know which companies you have shares in, and it's out there now for complete disclosure, and you've invested heavily in financial institutions, energy companies, mining corporations. I've gone through the list. Some of those mining companies may be involved in critical minerals now or down the road, and of course that is something that would benefit you if the DIA actually starts, directing those types of investments. But now there's also the favorability of past clients of yours, or those that you helped in financing as an investment broker in the past. So, public perception is important here. And it is the court of public opinion that matters. So what are you going to do to ensure that those companies you worked with in the past aren't going to taint their ability to participate in this? That looks like favoritism to the general public.
Yeah, I mean, the process is designed to prevent that. So at the very basic level, the ethics commissioner identifies companies with which I would have to put a screen in place. I have one of those, which is my former employer, RBC. They made a judgment that no screen was required on the rest of it. I know that's not your question, or the full extent of your question. And then the process of the procurement decision it's a team sport, and frequently the bids are considered against a predetermined grid of scales and weightings. And so it would be impossible for any individual to monkey with the process and change the scores in the clear light of day of the whole team.
If you can, I think some of us have been around here as long as I have been. We don't always believe that that is possible. We believe, we have to be, sometimes we got to take off the rose-colored glasses and look at what's actually happening, and sometimes we find things aren't as they seem. Was there a competitive process to hire you as CEO?
That was the dialogue that I had with
The Prime Minister.
the Privy Council office in the course of discussing the position, its terms, and the opportunity.
And they offer you a salary that is the highest in Canadian history for a public servant.
As I understand the process, they rank the position on the basis of a grid of.
But you're off the grid.
In this case, Crown Corporation CEOs, and as I understand it, I'm in line with one of those levels in the grid.
But you're not a Crown Corporation yet.
Yeah, I can't speak for the decisions that they made, but that's my understanding of the process.
Okay, so no competitive process. You
I know,
got
I
the
didn't-
job
I don't-
based
I didn't-
upon
I
that
didn't say
you've got
that.
a close personal relationship with the Prime Minister.
No, I didn't say there's no competitive process. I don't know what process there was.
I think we can assume it.
I expressed a willingness to help the country and a desire to do so if my skills fit somewhere.
Right.
I discussed with the clerk and his team possible places where that could work, where the things I've done in the past have relevance to what the government is trying to do. And we settled on this one where frankly, I think the skills and experiences I had are quite germane to the exercise we're undertaking.
Okay, so are you living here in Ottawa, or are you still living in Toronto?
I have a home in Toronto, and I spend a lot of time here.
How much is a lot of time?
The agency is, by intent, set up in both places. I was hired in a Toronto job. We have first and foremost prioritized the addition of procurement experts, like my colleague to my right, and infrastructure leaders, like my colleague to my left. Over time, we envisaged the team that is outwards facing to the supply chain to be quite logically located in Toronto, but the vast majority of the team right now is in Ottawa.
Thank you, Mr. Guzman. Over to you, Ms. Lapointe. 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome to committee, Mr. Guzman. I recently held a mining and defense roundtable in Sudbury, and we heard from local businesses as well as innovation hubs about the technologies that have been developed in the mining sector to keep miners safe. Technologies such as automation, remote systems, and worker safety systems. And we talked about how these same innovations and technologies could keep our Canadian Armed Forces members safe as well. Can you tell us how the Defence Investment Agency will identify and integrate these kinds of capabilities, like regions from Sudbury, into the procurement and the investment decisions? And how will we connect them to Canada's broader defence strategy? Is there a defined process in place for that?
That's a terrific question. I think there are mountains of areas of opportunity in this big basket. And if you'll permit me to outline how I think about them, the first is the procurement exercise. Just doing what we've always done as a government, but do it faster, do it better, and include the benefits of to Canada of that. And so the modular assault rifles I mentioned is an example. Canadian supplier, Army wants them, do it faster, get more guns earlier in the hands of the Army. Second is renovate the process, so do things differently. My colleague, Mr. Robitaille, is the senior person on the submarine procurement process. I take no credit for it because it was largely PSPC decision-making, but the innovation in that process was really quite clever and is germane to your question, because the Navy was very helpful by identifying the capabilities they needed and turned it over to the rest of the team to meet those capabilities, which put the PSPC then, now the DIA, in a position to look straight at the suppliers and say, don't worry about telling us how great your equipment is, because we're okay with either. Focus on benefits to Canada. And so what's happened is both of those parties, the German-Norwegian joint venture and the Korean team, have spent the last year crisscrossing Canada trying to find Canadian companies to add to their bid because they know it's a really important part of the selection process. So that's one way to get Canadian supply chain into the procurement platforms. You can keep going down the chain, and I can circle big pools of opportunity beyond that. So we're not set up right now to field inquiry from all small and medium-sized enterprise. We're set up to do very large procurements. We may drop that a little bit as we go forward. But when and I could go on for too long about this, but when I look at the opportunity to coordinate our dialogue with small and medium-sized enterprise to connect them with each other so they can present more capable inputs into platforms, that's a huge opportunity. And then, and I'll stop in a second, if you take the Defense Industrial Strategy, in that strategy there is a list of sovereign capabilities. There's an exercise to do that is just starting, and it will have to involve us and ICE at NDND, to not just use that set of sovereign capabilities as a screen against which we make procurement decisions, but to actually take those capabilities horizontally and say, okay, if space is one of them, or if avionics is one of them, how do we have a conscious strategy across the country to find the companies that fit into that so that 10 years from now, 15 years from now, as a country, we have something that's of comparative advantage to others and we can use it for trade.
I can tell you, Mr. Guzman, that the SMEs that I met with in Sudbury would be very appreciative and pleased with the response that you just gave. As the agency moves forward, how will you track and be able to demonstrate that investments are translating into Canadian-made products and that we're leveraging Canadian supply chains and expertise and creating jobs for Canadians? What mechanisms will be in place to measure that in practice?
So we'll score it, and I'll ask my colleague to elaborate in a second if he wants, but as we are considering the submarine proposals, for example, there's a conscious observation of what Canadian content is in there, in what form, how much of it is jobs, which are always welcome, how much of it is jobs plus strategic benefit to the country, how much of it is IT transfer, technology transfer, how much is IP sovereignty. So it's a conscious part of all of those procurement processes. We in addition need to set out a set of KPIs, which we're in to start of a discussion with PCO on, to actually be accountable and be tracked against those kind of things. The examples I gave at the start, though, you know, whether I'm right that it's 2 years early or 2.5 years early, at the moment it's quite easy to point to some of these processes and identify chunks of steps we have eliminated that are not material to transparency and fairness, that are not material to arriving at a decision, and to get there faster. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, well, I would emphasize the importance that we're putting now on Canadian content in the decision that we're going to be making. So Mr. Guzman was talking about the evaluation grids that we're using. So like moving forward, like there will be almost always a consideration of like Canadian content. And then, so that's upstream, so before the decision is made. But after, like part of the defense industrial strategy includes a renewal and an update by ISED of the industrial and technological benefit like policy that will also include a tracking of the jobs that are created afterwards. So we're going to be working like together to have this data about the number of jobs and over time like make sure that this is well structured and aligned with the sovereign capabilities that have been identified.
Thank you. Monsieur Savard, Tremblay, over to you for 6 minutes.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to welcome all of our witnesses today. Thanks for being here today. Thanks for the opening remarks. Now, there have been attempts at reform over the years, and some experts have observed that they always ended up hitting the same obstacle. These sub-agencies end up stepping on each other's toes sometimes. And sometimes when something doesn't work, everyone passes the blame to one another. So with this new agency, some functions that have been distributed at defense, procurement, and ISAT, everything is now unified in this agency, and we're being told that it will make things easier. But there are some questions that remain. For instance, National Defense determines the needs, and the agency will go ahead with the procurement, and there are other departments who also are involved. So how do we not repeat the mistakes of the past? Up to you who wants to go ahead and answer the question.
Thank you for the question. And I think it's a very observant question and a very relevant question. I guess I'd make a couple comments. And I understand that this has been tried before, and I understand that this has been tried before by different governments of different colors. I would say, first of all, the landscape has changed. Our world has changed, and the need is much, much greater than it's ever been. And I think that's a universally held view by Canadians, at least for the moment. And so the necessity of doing it will hopefully keep people on the rails of executing. The process of setting up the agency initially, as I joked when I first got here, the first step actually made things worse because we set up a new group inside PSPC to be a new set of procurement experts. That was never the end game, so my joke was a joke. Now the step we're going through is to get to the starting part of your question, is to bring in, clarify, and bring into one place the expertise from PSPC, which is the part we're farthest along with, the expertise from ISED, which we're in a good place, and the expertise from National Defense. And I'll come back to what I think is the most important part of your question, which is the relationship between the DIA and National Defense going forward. We are also in the process so we're well down the path of the next step of the DIA, which is to separate it from PSPC. At that point, we'll have clarified completely our relationship with PSPC. There'll be a division, there'll be no overlap. Similarly with ISED. Similarly simplified with Finance and Treasury Board, the number of times we have to go back. So I'm confident about all of that. The big rock is defense, and finding a way to have a military that we have trained to hang on for the one thing they think they really need, because they only get a chance to buy something every 10 or 15 years. So we have trained them to do what they're doing. They're behaving rationally as leaders. But we're in a new world where if it was one thing every 10 years, now it's 10 things every 1 year. So I'm optimistic that we can get to a place where, and in the process, the DIA is going to be involved with DND right at the beginning, so that we can bring all of these principles to the start of the process. And I'm confident that once we get going, like in many countries are doing very similar things, by the way, that we will get to a place where on places where the capabilities are truly differentiated in the eyes of the CAF, that the system will deliver that. But then in the 8 or 9 out of 10 cases where it's kind of a toss-up, whether we buy the one thing they think is best or the one that meets some of our other objectives, like-minded allies, economic value for Canada, technology transfer, that we'll be able to make progress on that. But we need to keep the focus on because it's been tried before, because it's hard for government to change. This has got to be a relentless pursuit of doing things differently.
Admettons qu'on y va avec un cas de figure. Je vais vous laisser.
To speak of a specific example, if there's a conflict between different departments on a project, who will make the final call?
It's with the exception of defense, it's very clear that the decision making is our accountability. The complex issue you're putting your finger on quite correctly is that they need to remain the experts on requirements. They need to be accountable for picking the platforms that protect their men and women in service and are most effective at protecting Canada. And so we have to find an overlap.
Admettons un cas de figure. Dans le cas où il y avait l'échec.
So if a project fails, in real life it happens, if there's a failure, whose fault is it? Is it the National Defense? Is it the agency's fault? Is it PSPC's fault?
I think it probably, whose fault it is, hopefully we don't spend a whole bunch of time on whose fault it is, we fix it and move forward, but whose fault it is probably depends on what went wrong. Did we make the wrong decisions in the procurement process and end up with litigation we didn't otherwise need? Were the specifications off? Did the CAF request too many customizations for the Canadian military that we couldn't execute properly? I think it would depend on the circumstance.
15 secondes, alors
I have 15 seconds left. The chair will interrupt us when it's time. Some experts, Colonel Davis, was saying that strengthening military capacity has to come from a responsible department. So why is it a Secretary of State that is supervising the agency?
So that's beyond my pay grade. I mean, I didn't decide the form of this agency. I think, as I understand it, before I got here, there were different perspectives on where it sit. And if you look across our allies, and as I say, and I'm happy to elaborate at some point in this 2 hours because we get really boring if we're just talking about my appointment. But some, different countries have it in different places, but all are trying to achieve very similar objectives.
Thank you, Mr. Guzman. Mr. Svatamble. Over to you, Mr. Anderson. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for appearing, Mr. Guzman, and the folks that you brought with you. Many of us have taken a pay cut to work here, and I understand you took a pay cut as well.
I'm getting paid less than I've gotten paid in the past. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Have you heard of the dollar a year men?
CDL.
Yep. What are they?
I don't know the history all that well, but I think they were business folks who came to try to help government.
And they were paid $1 a year.
Okay.
When you expressed a desire to help, did you offer to be paid nothing to do this?
I did not.
You didn't. Okay. You said it's beyond your pay grade. Your pay grade is the highest, I believe, in the government at the moment.
Yeah, I think we went through this.
I think there's not much that's above your pay grade then. Is that correct? Well, is it?
It's a turn of phrase, as you know.
Yes, it
which
is.
means that I did not make the decision, and nor was it my decision to make.
Exactly. Okay. Media reports that you plan to hire up to 400, and you're poaching from predominantly three public service, innovation, and D&D, of course. If you fail to deliver, is any portion of your salary going to be cut if you fail on a project? In other words, is it set up like the private sector where you bonus incentives and so on?
There's a bonus component to
There
this
is.
package.
So you will fail to get that if there's a failure.
It'll be in a decision in the clerk's hands.
In whose hands?
The clerk of the Privy Council.
Okay. How do you respond to the concern? Oh, never mind. You've already answered that. That's fine. You mentioned that you sped up the procurement of the rifles that we just did. In fact, that was started between 2009 and 2015 during the Harper government is when that project was gone. It seems to have hit a dead spot for 10 years. And then in 2024, responding to, we absolutely have to do that, it was picked. And it seems to me that you came along and just picked that off the top and are claiming credit for doing it, when in fact it's been in operation for over 2 decades. Can you respond to that?
I mean, I would do the opposite, which is, I said with the submarines, most of the things we've announced were not creations of our agency.
Exactly.
These
So-
are 10 or some of these are 10 or 12-year procurements. So,
actually, 2 decades.
If we shorten them by 50%, it's 5 years. And so I credit DM Reza and PSPC and her team for having made decisions that sped things up. Most of those
with
were,
respect, if I may, this has been going on for 2 decades, not 12 years, 2 decades. And in fact, it was ready for delivery when you were appointed. So there's not much that was sped up in this, I would put to you.
Yeah, well, I understand it was delivered a couple of years faster than the track it was on.
Okay. With regard to Canadian sovereignty and weapons procurement, combat systems, weaponry, and communication, those are the 3 primary operational aspects, are all American in our submarines. We're shooting their Mark 488 torpedoes, and Mods 4 and 7. What steps are we taking to replace this? Because we can get all the fancy Canadian hardware in the world, but if we have nothing to shoot from it, what are we doing to switch over our armaments?
Right. So you've identified a real challenge the country's got, which is we have never prioritized.
But it's your job to fix that challenge, sir.
If I may, we have never prioritized building capabilities on any of this. And if you look at some of our allies and some with much smaller economies, and
Are we doing that, though?
and what
No.
they've done, like Sweden, I'll get to it, and France and Turkey, a little less relevant.
Sir, I've only got five minutes, so I really have to try to make this count. What are we doing?
Yeah, so we are favoring Canadian suppliers when there are Canadian suppliers to favor. I do not have in my hands a lever of industrial policy to build an industry. We might get to that point. Right now, my obligation is to use the procurement process to favor and build Canadian companies. But
Specifically with weapon systems, what are we doing now?
If there's nobody in the country that makes it, we are some distance away from being able to create a company that makes it.
Okay, so we are not we are not operationally pushing to create a Canadian industry in arms right now.
We are supporting Canadian companies that have capabilities, helping them, encouraging the prime contractor to put them on their platforms
Okay.
and help them build their economic value.
Okay. Are you involved in the F-35 purchase at all?
I'm not.
Okay. Stephen Ferrer says it's not his file. You're saying it's not your file. I'm not sure whose file it is, but it's certainly sitting there. The strategy is full of forums, councils, industry days. What actually procurement timelines? Have you got timelines actually set up right now
In terms of what?
in terms of producing something?
So we have, and Mr. Robitaille may be better at some of this than I am, we have timelines, which I don't know off the top of my head, for almost everything that you've got in the strategy.
You've got timelines, but
We have timelines here, and I apologize for cutting you guys off. Mr. Watchhorn, over to you for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci à Monsieur Guzman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Guzman, for being with us. And thank you for your service to our country. Thanks to you two as well. So when I got started, we had very long timelines for military procurement, and there were 4 agencies that were involved. I said PSPC, DND, and Finance. And I met former military members and PSPC people, and they told me that the best way of hitting the timelines was to have one single agency. And this was before the creation of the Defense Investment Agency. So I think this is a good policy when it comes to procurement. I was fortunate enough to talk to people from Ukraine, and they were talking to us about their product development cycles. And we were very proud to say that we went from 10 years to 4. And they were telling us, well, we are working with a month. That's our deadline or timeline. So in terms of procurement timelines, what are you going to improve or have already improved to improve these timelines?
Do you want to start? Yeah. Okay.
Merci pour l'excellente question. C'est vraiment le
Thank
cœur.
you for the perfect question. That is really the gist of our mandate, accelerating procurement. So the first point, or when we look at the creation of the agency, is that we received much larger authorities. So we won't need to go to the Treasury Board as often for authorization, so that will speed things up. Secondly, as Mr. Guzman was saying, we are involved a lot more upstream with D&D to talk about their needs, and we can talk about the state of the industry and see what could be achieved. So rather than working on defining the needs for months and years without really linking things up with the industry, we are involved at an earlier point in time so that that connection can be made. And third, as was the case in our effort with the submarines, we try to pre-qualify a small number of providers to go faster. So we don't have to check everything once it's go time to see if these companies meet the needs. So we can have processes that are less complex and faster. And finally, we are using more of a commercial approach with more simple contracts, incentivizing the parties. You talked about the Ukrainian experience, and that is a core element in how we see things with drones and other equipment. They are not working with a 2 or 4 year development cycle or timeline, so they have to have a different approach to IP and other issues. So we will have to go ahead faster on all of those fronts. Ms. Dranville, would you like to add something? Well, as my colleague was saying, this is an excellent question. Thank you very much. What I would like to add is the following. We have a security program in place in PSPC, which will allow small and medium enterprises to go and get their security accreditations so that they can start contributing along the supply chain much faster. So it's really giving a boost to the entire ecosystem in terms of added value. And it also helps with regard to the coordination of our efforts. So in addition to what my colleague outlined, this, I believe, is also another element that will mean that we will have a much more integrated approach and we will go and seek Canadian expertise. Now, we heard also from PSPC, ex-PSPC people or ex-military members. They have been saying that the economic benefit doesn't always have to come from the military world. It can come from elsewhere. So when you are doing a contract, what weight are you giving to economic benefit so that it actually plays into the defense industrial strategy? Well, it varies from project to project. We don't always have the luxury of attributing the same weight. But what is favored is really integrating the capacity or the platform into what we already have. So that is key. And what's changing with the industrial defense strategy, the defense industrial strategy rather, is, I mean, initially, of course, economic benefit for the country as a whole, it's good news. Some sectors maybe more so than others. But as Mr. Guzman was saying, we can sometimes have comparative advantages over our allies where we have greater potential. So our ISAT colleagues are working on updating the industrial and technological benefit document they have and guidelines they have. So we will hopefully favor this aspect of these investments even more.
To you for 2.5 minutes.
Merci. Alors,
Thank you. 27th of March, 2026, there was a press conference, and the announcement was that the agency will become a separate standalone agency, and at that point in time, who will you be reporting to?
So in the strategy, the government indicated its intent to set up the agency as a freestanding entity. There's a number of ways that could be set up, and we're working our way through that. And so I don't know the answer right now. It could span from a crown corporation to a traditional department or something in between.
mais disons que
But previously, I think you were saying that the way the agency is set up is to avoid future problems and that there's this one central point. But now you're saying that, well, I mean, we thought about that aspect, but we don't know when this will happen and what the reporting structure will be?
I think it's in, I mean, do you have any comments on that?
I can definitely, if I may. Thank you for your question. Naturellement, comme M. Guzman vous expliquait, il y a une...
As Mr. Guzman was explaining, there is a number of different models that could apply to the agency, going from a department to a crown corporation, and in each model you will have a different governance structure. So you can be at arm's length from all departments, for instance. There might be a board in charge, but if you're talking about the department, of course, that is also within a portfolio, but it's a department structure. So right now, we are looking into the pros and cons of each model, and we're waiting to see what the final decision will be. Once that decision is made, depending on the pros and cons that are outlined, and if it turns out to be a department model, again, it's not our decision, it's the Prime Minister's decision, but that decision will come in due time, and we don't know any more than that. So there might even be some legislation or a bill. Because you don't know who you will be reporting to, so you really don't have any information about the timing, because we initially were talking about spring, It's 21st of March to the 20th of June. That's the Mr. Savard-Tremblay, your time is up.
5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions are for Mr. Guzman, and if after you could submit the address for your Toronto office would be excellent. I'm sure you understand that submarines are also highly classified intelligence gathering vessels with your limited defense and military background. What specific steps have you taken to build operational knowledge and defense capability requirements and understand the strategic threat to the procurement process for these sensitive vessels? And specifically, have you been briefed by CSIS or CSE or others on this file?
So I'll turn it over to Mr. Robitaille.
The question's for yourself.
Yeah,
have you been briefed by CSIS or CSE on the sensitivities of this information that's gathered and the threat assessments?
I've had a number of threat assessment briefings, security briefings, inclusive of Navy, inclusive of
from CSIS and CSE, or who have
from
you had
DND.
Specifically from DND.
Yeah.
Thank you. I reviewed the RFI for the submarine project.
Did you want me to answer the first question?
Sure. Yeah.
So you asked how we were taking that in part of the decision, and I think Mr. Robitaille would give you detail, but the integrated project team most definitely involves CAF and involves very senior Navy, including right to the top of the Navy.
Okay.
And we look to them for the expertise on capabilities.
Thank you. I reviewed the RFI for the submarine project, and for the navigation and the submarine warfare system itself, it's left open for the prime to define. Why not a Canadian company in the contract or in the RFI?
So we're seeking to combine the expertise of the manufacturer, the expertise of the CAF, and the Canadian capabilities. And so it's up to the manufacturer to decide, do they want to put forward Canadian componentry on the submarine because they recognize that that's a key
Why would you
element
not
of our decision.
have a Canadian company do it? We already have a Canadian company with Canadian IP that does all the navigation and submarine warfare systems for our Navy presently, and also some in our Coast Guard, as well as 27 NATO and allied navies. Why would that not? So it seems to be a no-brainer. Will you commit to put our Canadian-owned IP into the submarine project?
Yeah, I don't know enough about the specific IP capabilities, strengths, and weaknesses of those pieces. For the moment, and there is improvement here too, possibly, as you think about the future. But for the moment, we're starting at the pointy end of the spear, which is the folks that are trying to sell us stuff. And we're looking them in the eye and saying, you need to make that as Canadian as you can if you want to be favored in the process. Is there a step in the future where we're being more directive about specific components? I suspect so.
Okay, thank you.
Just on the submarines, as an example, in-service support on all of these platforms is 2.5 times the dollar value of the purchase price. So one of the things that this process has done.
So I'm not hearing a commitment.
Focus on
I'd like to move on to my next question, if I could.
Content in the ISS.
Your RBC biography was strangely deleted online when you did take this job, but it did state, as head of RBC, you provided coverage to high net worth families, corporations, institutions, and governments, and also at Goldman Sachs, gold and metal mining, or global metal mining section, where you worked with the Prime Minister. Are any of these files that you handled connected with Chinese state-owned enterprises, or connected with entities listed in OFAC or OFSI, or other allied registries? And have you disclosed these and any other high net worth clients? And have you been screened for conflicts with identified hostile states?
I presume the bio was deleted by the bank because I don't work at the bank.
It's not typical that happens. Normally they wait for usually longer. But
well,
fair.
I don't know about that. So over the course of my career, I would have worked with thousands of clients. So is there possibly a connection somewhere to someone that meets some of those criteria? There's a strong possibility, I guess. I did business with Sherritt in a prior life, and while that company's in compliance with Canadian laws, it had challenges with some of the U.S. laws.
Do you feel you should be screened for those connections then? It sounds like you haven't had them.
I've been through the full ethics process as
not ethics,
requested.
Security screening for this is a national security.
Yeah, I mean,
highly intelligent.
I'm happy to participate in any screening the government would feels appropriate.
So you haven't yet, though,
I think,
you have been.
Yeah.
There seems to be a lot of confusion. This is pretty important information in terms of security screening. So maybe you could get back to the committee with a written of what steps have been taken for security screenings. I want to move on to the recent secret MOU the RCMP and China's Ministry of Public Security signed. It's been called a counterintelligence danger by former senior RCMP members. Were you briefed on the content of this MOU before it was signed? And if not, how can we evaluate the role in terms of law enforcement information sharing arrangements with adversarial states? Does that create vectors for intelligence penetration into the work DIA is supposed to do?
I'm not familiar with the MOU. I don't know that it's.
And that's it, guys. Mr. Mallette, over to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question would be for Mr. Guzman. 8-wing CFP Trenton, which is in my riding of the Bay of Quinte, is the backbone of Canada's strategic and tactical airlift capability. What specific procurement reforms is the DIA implementing to ensure critical aircraft parts, support, equipment that may reach 8-wing and other transport wings faster and with fewer delays? And this may go as well to Mr. Robitaille.
Yeah, I think Mr. Robitaille will probably be better at it than I am, but I'll start. So for the moment, we're focused on procurements that are $100 million and up. And so to the extent that the componentry you're talking about is part of an in-service support package that comes with a platform, then we're accountable for making the right decisions along that path. At the moment, to the extent that it is supplies, inventory for existing equipment, it's either being done by DND or will be done by PSPC.
Okay. Mr. Robitaille?
No, I would add that in-service support, especially for air platform, is a sovereign capability. Like, we have great Canadian companies, and it's a great opportunity. We already are awarding contracts to Canadian companies, and that will be a focus, and an expectation that the vast majority of the in-service support will be done by Canadian company, either directly or indirectly. So now there are some components of platforms that we own that are like based in the U.S. that needs like kind of a part where we have no choice. So there's some limitation from time to time that we cannot achieve, but like the vast majority of in-service support, like we expect and plan to be done in Canada.
Okay, well, further to that, then Canada's air mobility fleet, as we know, is central to domestic disaster response, NORAD operations and contributions, and international deployments as well. I guess my question is, how is the Defense Investment Agency prioritizing procurements for fleets based at Trenton, particularly the CC-130, the J model now, the C-17 Globemasters, et cetera, to avoid any readiness gaps, I guess, for Mr. Guzman?
Sure, thank you for the question. A lot of that accountability resides with DND. So they've got and their best position to identify where the gaps are, where the needs are, what's the evolution. I don't know if you've seen the Air Force's leadership slide on the capability build in the Air Force. It is considerable, and so it is for them to sequence what they think they need when, and afford an opportunity to match that with the immense challenge of training and infrastructure and staffing and inventories. We will increasingly get involved at the front end of the process, and so we will increasingly have an influence on that Gantt chart of projects. But at the moment, they're very much in charge of identifying what they need, when they think they need it, and will become part of a discussion as we go forward to be more involved with those.
Okay, just one, do I have time, Mr. Chair? In respect to that and everything from evacuations to disaster relief, which we're seeing an awful lot of demand on our transport fleet as well, and this again may go to whomever can answer it, how are we accounting for surge capacity, climate change resilience, and future procurement and infrastructure planning?
I think as unsatisfying as it is, I'm going to give you the same answer, which is that between the RCMP, border control, armed forces are going to have to identify the capabilities they need, and then we'll be involved with maximizing Canadian benefit and delivering those faster.
Okay, all right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mallette. You did it in 4 minutes. You had another minute to go, but I'm going to take it away from you now and give it to Ms. Gallant. Over to you.
Speaker, or Mr. Chairman, I'll take it. So To Mr. Guzman, which steps or stages does the DIA save the procurement process? In other words, how are the defense purchases sped up?
So I will hand this over to Mr. Robitaille, but it's at its core, it's looking at the whole process, which, you know, a lot of which is inside DND, and then historically that would have been thrown over the wall to PSPC, and so somewhere in that chain, we use 10 or 12 years on a major platform, and so bringing into parallel what used to be done by PSPC and DND. Working with Treasury Board to get higher authorities, which we have, and ability to, where we don't have to go ask permission for Treasury Board. Bringing the ITB process into the DIA so that we can keep the cadence of that process in line with the cadence of the procurement process. And who have I left out? I guess that's it. Treasury Board, I said, PSPC, DND, really bringing them either into one place or the process is in parallel.
Okay, that's very fulsome, thank you. Now, NATO has advised member countries to adopt a war mindset, even a war footing. In terms of the potential to defend our territory or prepare for an expeditionary force, what action visible to Canadians have you taken to speed up the way procurements are processed?
Well, I think the announcement we've made, we can point to earlier delivery. So it's unquestionable that the submarine process has saved years, and I don't take credit for it. Again, it was largely the PSPC folks, but the decision to go very quickly to a down select to 2 suppliers, and have those 2 suppliers force them to be focused on Canadian content, is very different than what would have been done in the old world, and skips a whole cycle of years of going back and forth with multiple suppliers. The Navy was instrumental in that because they were able to satisfy themselves that a small number of boats fit their requirements, and that freed the rest of the process to be able to focus on getting on with the decision making. But that's an example of a very clear example of saving years.
Now, do you consider the U.S. to be a trusted ally?
We're going to have to continue to do business with the U.S. as a country, whether that's military or not. We, obviously, part of this exercise is to diversify our supply base so that we have a smaller percentage coming from a single supplier. That supplier, in many cases, is the U.S. But we don't have domestically the capabilities of some of these U.S. primes, at least not yet. If you look at what Sweden and France, as examples, have done to build their own domestic capability, it's really quite impressive. And so there's a path there, but yes, it's about diversifying our supplies.
Which other countries you mentioned have set up a DIA?
Almost all NATO countries have it in some fashion or other.
Okay, so we've been waiting for a fighter jet replacement, and I know your department is not taking care of that, but we've been waiting for it for over a decade. And even though there was a capabilities competition and a clear winner in 2021, we still don't have a decision on the full order. Obviously, it's political interference. Given that your Secretary of State has been the chief opponent to one of the fighter jets in the final decision, what will you do to ensure that there's no political interference
It's quite simple. The decision isn't mine to take. So the agency, we don't have a team on it. We're not involved in it.
And that one, but that was an example. There will be other procurements, the submarine procurement, for example. How will you ensure that political interference won't stall that?
Sure. And I keep saying I'm going to pass it to Mr. Robitaille. This time I actually will. But yeah, it's a matter of running a process that keeps the decision making and the alternatives evaluation away from the elected participants for their protection and for the protection of the process. But you might want to elaborate.
And actually, just one more question. In terms of Colt Canada, what exactly did you do to speed up that procurement to get it ahead of time?
Were you? I wasn't.
So you weren't part of that?
In the middle of that one.
In the case of Colt, I think the process was already well advanced, but there was
that's
advantage
good.
in
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. All right. So, what percentage of the overall cost of a project does the DIA add, the administration fees? If you're going to look at a project and how much you're allowed to spend, what portion of that is a consequence of dealing through the DIA?
Well, there's no fee per se.
There's a cost.
There's a resource that has almost entirely been moved from other places of government into the DIA. So at that point, the incremental cost to the government is zero. And to the extent that we can run a process more effectively and run more projects and have more output, then on that measure of efficiency, the government is better off. But there's exactly one outside employee right now in the DIA, and that's me. Everyone else has been existing costs moved to the DIA.
Ms. Glant, we have to proceed. I'm so
I thought I
sorry.
was getting.
I gave you extra. I'm kind to you. Mr. Ramanado, over to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, I'd like to thank the witnesses for being with us today. Mr. Guzman, in the 2024 report of this committee with respect to defense procurement, the number one recommendation was that the Government of Canada internally review and map the defense procurement process from start to finish across all relevant departments and agencies with the purpose of simplifying Treasury Board Secretariat guidelines and removing any points of duplication. In your intervention at the beginning, you mentioned a little bit about identifying those sticking points. We've got various departments that are involved in defense procurement. You have the CAF, who identifies capability that they need. The statement of requirements is prepared. Then it goes off to, well, in previous iterations, it would go off to PSPC for them to prepare the RFI or the RFP. Then it would go out, and it would take many, many, many years to get any of these projects finalized. Could you elaborate a little bit about some of the steps that you've taken to identify where we can streamline these steps, these efficiencies? The Prime Minister has said very clearly that we need to work at the speed of relevance. If you could identify for us some of the little, as an outsider coming in and seeing that with a fresh pair of eyes, where we've improved the process.
Invite my colleagues to add. Before I got here, the team had already accomplished meaningful additional authorities with the Treasury Board to on a risk-based basis, be able to proceed with procurements and projects without another whole loop through the central agencies. So that's a big one. The involvement of the DIA very early on as CAF is requirement setting and bringing a lens of what complications or simplifications to the whole project can you influence at the very beginning is another one. The internalization of the ITB process to the DIA. Now we're still going to need ISED in spots because, as was observed earlier, that the benefits to Canada might not all be defense related. So if we become expert on the defense piece, we'll need our colleagues to continue to contribute. But reducing the number of folks at the table materially. And Madame Drainville has been involved in sort of the next iteration of the DIA, and it's thematically similar, which is how do we continue to get more authorities within our own control, and how do we simplify or eliminate our relationships with others. But I'd invite my colleagues to add if they have any thoughts.
Yeah, I think one of the thing that I would add is really the process was built very sequentially. And where we're moving is doing things in parallel.
Okay.
So that overall, many of the activities, they may not be shorter, we want to make them shorter, but more importantly, we don't wait for one to be completed for the other. So that involvement, for example, of the agency early on in defining the requirement and ensuring that it reflects what the industry can do, and especially taking into account what the Canadian industry can do. But I would add separately, and this is what having leaders like Mr. Guzman bring is a more commercial approach, having simpler contracts, having being more trying to get more out of our contract, but also make them simpler so that companies, when they bid, they don't need to spend as much time, they don't need to create as big a team to create their proposal, and that we focus on what's important as opposed to 1,500 pages RFPs and all of this. I think this is when we look at that, it means that more Canadian companies can participate. The RFPs are faster, the results are better, and then we get the capabilities faster to the Canadian forces.
Thank you. Mr. Guzman, you mentioned that many of our allies have similar agencies in some way set up. Have you had an opportunity to speak to some of your counterparts with some of our allies and get some best practices and feedback?
Yeah, as has DND. So DND did a really good research piece, I presume in the run-up to forming the DIA, which lays out the differences and similarities, how nations weight domestic content, where the agency sits, what are formal authorities in the agency versus formal authorities in the military, and so yeah, I think it's you know, some sit inside of DND, some sit outside of DND, but we have had time to compare, and I've started to build relationships with my equivalents where I've had the opportunity to cross paths with them, and I think there's more opportunity in that regard as well.
Thank you, Mr. Guzman.
Thank you.
Mr. Marmonato. Monsieur Tremblay, back to you for 2.5 minutes.
Merci. Alors, on sait, il y a eu un audit qui a été réalisé.
There is an audit that was done by DND in December 2025, and the average time of a procurement project could reach 10 years according to that audit. So we're talking about accelerating procurement, reducing timelines. Now we're talking about large-scale projects, but I don't think that you will sacrifice the rigor and the detailed approach and the due diligence. So how will it happen? How will you maintain that balance between the due diligence on the one hand and then speeding things up?
Well, I think it's an execution decision or process. It's, as I say, this whole exercise is complicating a decision because we're bringing in many more considerations, and as is by Canadian across the economy, not just in the military. So we've got to evolve our thinking. We've got plenty of procurement expertise in the team. You know, I come in with a fresh set of eyes, and Mr. Robitaille can tell you that I say, why can't we do this? Why can't we do that? And in some places he says, well, we just can't for the following reasons. In other cases, we do change the process. So I think it's a balance, frankly. It's a bit like business leadership in any regard, which is you're making trade-offs across a set of criteria with a goal of optimizing against objectives that are more complicated than they used to be.
Dites-moi concrètement, parce que là, on s'entend.
So 10 years is too long. I think the agency's objective is to accelerate these processes. What would be a reasonable timeline, and what is the objective to cut it in half? Do you have specific time numbers attached to these timelines?
I think it's hard to identify a one-size-fits-all timeline. Certainly, choices that involve buying so-called off-the-shelf equipment, military off-the-shelf, where the capability exists and you arrive at a decision to buy it without customization, that can save a lot of time. To the extent that it's simple rearmament type decisions, you know, I think those timeframes could be really collapsed. To the extent that they are really big, complex decisions like the submarines, I mean, we've shown good acceleration, but you've got to run those processes with rigor. So I don't know that there's a simple answer. I think what we will be accountable for is a set of key performance indicators, and are happy to and should be scored against those over time. But I don't think there's going to be a one-size-fits-all time frame for any particular procurement.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Bazin, over to you for 5 minutes.
Chair, just I want to do some quick questions, just following up on some of the comments made earlier. So the office for DIA in Ottawa is 180 Kent, is that correct? What's the office address in Toronto for the DIA?
The space that we were initially provided by PSPC was 4900 Yonge Street. I have deferred the decision to accept that space because it's frankly more than we need. I am using space in CDEV, so there's a few of us that use the space in CDEV, so zero incremental cost. In fact, I guess negative incremental cost to the government because we've given back the 4900.
So how many staff do you have with you in Toronto?
There's me and a couple others.
Okay, so bulk of the staff, there's going to be hiring up to 400. Bulk of them are going to be working in Ottawa?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, we talked about security clearance. What level of security clearance were you provided after you went through the screening process?
Top secret.
And what level of top secret?
I'm not sure I know that off the top of my head.
The highest? Okay. Just want to make sure that you can get the briefings you need to make sure we're buying the right equipment. You mentioned that you don't have a lot of experience on the defense file. What have you been doing to familiarize yourself with the work that the brave women and men who serve in the Canadian Armed Forces do? Are you gone out on training exercises with the Navy, the Air Force, the Army, Special Operations, Coast Guard?
In fact, next week I was supposed to be on a frigate in Asia, but I'm going to be here doing other things. I've had, there's been no end to the number of briefings. The military.
But if you really want to understand how things work, you need to be with those that serve.
Yeah, and I'd much rather next week be there, but unfortunately I've got to be here for.
So I'd encourage you to make the time to do it. And
I regret missing it.
Learning on the job is the best way
Agreed.
to figure out what we actually need and to hear the people that actually have to operate that equipment. You talk about the spending authorities being increased. How much spending authorities do you currently have under DIA on any particular project? What's the max?
The authorities I was referring to is with Treasury Board, the authority to proceed on procurements without having to go back to Treasury Board.
Okay.
And so that's up to medium risk projects. And they're the arbiter of risk.
So what's the level? What's considered a medium risk project versus a high risk project?
I don't know.
Based on expenditures or is it based on what we're buying?
Or is it a qualitative judgment, I expect?
It's basically based on a number of criteria, being the risk transfer with the company, the cost, developmental elements, whether there's a limitation of liability or not.
Okay.
Some legal risk assessment. So that's.
Would you
that's
be
a
able to
composite
provide that
assessment.
in writing to the committee, Mr. Robitaille, as to what classifies as mid risk, high risk, low risk?
Whatever definition exists, we're happy to.
Okay, thank you. So just coming back, so DIA is going to be responsible for infrastructure as well on base?
DCC will continue to do that.
Okay, so you don't have any control over building any infrastructure, housing, anything like that?
Yeah, that will remain with DCC.
Okay. So moving on, you talked about the subs. We had mentioned that the two companies that are involved that you down selected, but you reopened up the request for proposal process, trying to get more ITBs out of them. When does that close off? And is this, or anybody complain that this might be coercion just to try to get them to throw more money into Canada rather than just get the kit bought faster?
Yeah, Mr. Robitaille can handle the timing and process questions. There were a couple reasons for that. One is both proponents had spent time since their bid continuing to have dialogue with Canadian industry, Canadian component suppliers. And we saw merit in them being able to explain that to us and put it in the bid so we could consider it. They only had so much time before the bid they had to deliver their bids with the strategy. And so we told them, take another 3 weeks and have a look at the strategy and think hard about whether you have more to put on the table.
So the question is, though, does that add cost? Are the bids going up? And also, does that extend the timeline in receiving the submarines?
We don't expect it extends the timeline. We've compressed some things around it, and we expect that it'll have a positive effect on the benefits and the cost to Canada.
So one of the things that has been floated out there is operating a mixed fleet of submarines. Are you considering that at all? And if the bids come in, they're fairly equal, and both submarines have merit, would you consider a mixed fleet?
Yeah, I'm not the educated opinion in that matter. I think that it would have to be a discussion led principally by the Navy.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Bazin. Mr. Lapointe, over to you for 5 minutes.
So I wouldn't be doing an effective job as MP for Sudbury if I didn't talk about critical minerals and defence. As Canada's defence capabilities increasingly depend on secure and reliable access to critical minerals, can you tell us how the Defence Investment Agency can better integrate Canada's critical minerals sector into procurement decisions to strengthen the supply chain security and to reduce reliance on foreign sources?
Yes. So stockpiling of critical minerals is a priority for government. When you work through the process of getting funding authority, identifying the mineral, buying the mineral, storing the mineral, historically the government's not been set up to do that well. And so we're working through, led by the DIA, how do we do that? How do we get authorities from finance? How do we get authorities from Treasury Board? DND has a list of critical minerals that relate to the military, so we have that list that most countries do. Frankly, the U.S. is very public about theirs. And so we're putting that capability in place.
Yeah. So in a recent committee testimony that we heard here, experts were clear that secure and resilient supply chains for critical minerals are essential to Canada's national security. What mechanisms or decision-making tools will the agency use to ensure that the supply chain security is consistently built into procurement decisions?
Well, it's a key component of any procurement discussion, not just critical minerals. And so it's got to be part of the process. I would extend the comment in your question that not only is it critical for the country and for the military, but it's frankly a source of comparative advantage as we have our discussions with allies. And we as a country, this is me straying beyond the DIA as a personal opinion, but I think as a country, we need to spend more time thinking about where are the places that we are really good or can be really good and disproportionately emphasize the development of those, because that's what's going to have strategic value as you think about trading with either a current large trading partner in the States or anyone else.
Yeah. Mr. Guzman, you've managed complex operations where timely decisions and coordination have been critical. What changes will you prioritize and what processes will you implement to ensure that the Defence Procurement Agency delivers faster and more reliable results for the Canadian Armed Forces?
Yeah, look, it's a team sport, right? So I need the expertise of my colleagues that are two at the table and the rest who are behind us, who understand the system, who have been procurement professionals. My phrase when I got here was, I need procurement expertise, senior experienced expertise, but I need procurement expertise that have not been captured by the system, that are capable of independent thought, capable of innovation, which is how we've ended up with the leadership team we've had. Mr. Robitaille is the most senior procurement executive in the group. Could give you other examples of innovation that he's implemented in other spots of the government and in procurement. So, I'm a senior part of the team, but everyone's got to play a role. So then as you drop down to, okay, what does that mean that you've got procurement expertise, tenured procurement expertise, and someone who's come from the private sector and seen faster decision making? It's a discussion, and it's a discussion that there's, our leadership team at the top is quite small. A lot of it's sitting right here, and so we sit down and say, how do we do this faster? And we'll sit down with DM Fox and her team and say, okay, when we overlay this whole process, and now we're talking about making it more parallel, what are the points of interaction? And then within DND, they've obviously got the challenge of meeting that same objective between the CAF and the civilian side of DND. So it's a leadership management process. But I need the help of the people who know government, who know how we used to do it. Nobody's confused that this needs to get better. Like there's nobody sitting around saying we are doing it just great. And so it's a matter of finding people who can go beyond that statement and say, and if we change this, this, and this, we can get to a lot better place.
Yeah. So building on your response, the role requires balancing speed, accountability, and long-term value for Canadians. We know that Canadians uphold the values of their national security. So what processes should guide the agency to ensure that investments deliver both those immediate capabilities for the Canadian Armed Forces and lasting value for Canada's defence and industrial base?
Sure. Well, so the selections up front obviously have a role to play in the answer that I gave at the beginning in response to your small medium-sized business. Creating conditions in a procurement competition that incent the bidders, if they're non-Canadian, to add as much Canadian content as possible. The in-service support piece is very, very large because it's 2.5 times the upfront cost, and so consciously making decisions about ISS at the time of the initial procurement and making sure you're thinking through that whole journey. If it's a 40-year platform and we're done with the manufacturer in the first year or two, or what deliveries 4 or 5 years to deliver all of the capability, for the next 45 years, how do we make sure that Canadian companies disproportionately share in the value that's created from that initial choice? And that's, again, it's a part of the submarine process, and that consideration of ISS will more and more be a part of every procurement discussion we have.
Thank you, Mr. Guzman. I have to proceed now, given Mr. Anderson has his time up for the next 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Guzman, my colleague asked you a question, and I didn't really catch the answer. Is the U.S. a trusted ally? You talked around the question. You didn't answer the question.
I don't know. I think that's a question of opinion, I think. We interoperate with the U.S., in particular in the Air Force and NORAD.
No, I'm aware of what we do with the U.S. I'm asking you a question. It's a matter of opinion, but it's a matter of opinion that actually directs our future behavior.
Well, we in a way it doesn't, because
in your opinion, is the U.S. a trusted ally?
In my opinion, is not the relevant.
No, but I'm asking your opinion nonetheless. That makes it relevant right now.
I think in places we have to trust them, and we trust them. So when we interoperate in
so they are a trusted ally.
We have to trust them in those places.
Thank you.
When we make trade decisions, we can't always rely on the landscape remaining as it was the prior week. So I
understand
think we've
that.
got to be a little more practical.
With regard to sovereign capabilities, you had mentioned that with the submarine it didn't slow it down. My understanding is that the 2 bids that were accepted were submitted in March 2nd. Is that correct? Okay, and then yes or no is.
He nodded yes.
Okay. So yes.
Okay, yeah, and then in April we added a new requirement, and you said that didn't actually add time to it.
Do you want to answer it?
Yeah. So yes, we did provide a limited 3 weeks period for them to improve their proposal. It's actually ending on Wednesday, so we are on track, and we.
Well, it wasn't, but you added a requirement to it, and that actually did extend the time. Is that correct?
No.
It didn't.
So
it would have been 2 weeks doing nothing then, otherwise, or
we're just running other things in parallel.
Yeah.
We added a process to the existing process.
Okay, fair enough. Do you have any government experience, Mr. Guzman?
I've advised governments.
Pardon me?
I've advised governments.
Yeah, but working in government though.
Not until the last 4 months.
Because I've noticed a lot of the time you're kind of spreading these questions out because you don't know the answer to them. And I understand that in a leadership capacity, that's what you do. But you don't have experience in meshing. You're coming with private experience, which is distinctly different than government process.
It is.
Yes,
it is, and
indeed.
I think that's by intent. We have government experience. We've got so much government experience in the DIA that we could never possibly be accused of having not having enough government.
Okay,
experience.
what metric do you use to find a balance between sovereignty and cost?
Sovereignty and cost.
Yeah, you want to have Canadian content, which will add a cost.
So the Buy Canadian policy expresses hurdles and concepts, so that applies to us. When we make these decisions, it's never going to come down to a simple trade-off between A and B, because we would prefer to deal with a like-minded ally as a supplier than someone who's less like-minded.
So do you use a metric though, or
we prefer to have technology transfer than to not have technology transfer? So we will score these, as Mr. Robitaille said, on a grid.
So you do have a
and we'll
have a grid.
By procurement, we'll have a grid and put weightings against them, and then score them, and then there's obviously judgment overlays always, right? The global affairs is going to have a view at the end of the day, and so we will lead the process, and we'll take advantage of the expertise across government.
Okay, the $100 million threshold, is that arbitrary, or is that got something behind it?
I don't think there's any magic to it. It was selected before I got here, I think, as a means of controlling the amount of volume that came into the agency at its outset.
Okay. You're planning to buy Canadian. How are you planning to stop foreign countries from gaming the system to claim to be Canadian? So
yeah, you're right. It's not black and white, right? And if you look at what the U.S. is doing with their tariffs, they're trying to incent people to produce things in the United States.
Well, we're talking about this. How are you going to stop
And that's
this?
exactly what we're doing. So we will favor those who have significant economic footprints in Canada, who have employment in Canada, who pay taxes in Canada.
Regardless of their foreign oil.
They'll get higher points than than someone who doesn't.
Okay. You're being paid to at a premium to fixed procurement. So what are your top three measurable outcomes this year?
So we're just working through the KPIs with PCO. I would say, and Mr. Robitaille's heard me say this a million times, my first priority was make sure we don't lose a step on the existing procurements as they came over, as we disrupted teams, as we brought new people in from different groups in government and needed to keep those procurements running at the same speed. I get satisfied to report that there's nothing that we took over in the last 6 months that has lost a step at all. In fact, we can point to places where they've sped up. I think to Mr. Savard-Tremblay's question earlier, we should be held accountable to a set of KPIs on which we report, and we will be.
Thank you, Mr. Guzman. Mr. Aniston, I am going now over to Mr. Millet for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Further to that question that you just answered, Mr. Guzman, where you were saying we don't want to disrupt the teams. Recognizing that how many people do we know the DIA will employ when fully operational?
So we're at 130 now. Mm-hmm. I circled 400 in a prior committee meeting at some way down the road. Mm-hmm. The answer to your question really depends on what specific sets of procurements and groups we bring over. For example, the maritime, the National Shipbuilding Strategy, DMPB, those are very large groups of people. So if we arrive at a decision with PSPC and the rest of government that will take those over, we will be a lot bigger than if we decide not to take those people over. So, in the 300-400 absent that perhaps, and considerably larger if we take those bigger teams over.
Okay. What guidelines then will assist the DIA as it forms the integrated procurement teams, as you were just referring to? And how many teams do we know yet? I'm just trying to get a picture of how we're going to put flesh on the body, if you will. And what will their specific functions be? Do we have that kind of a command tree built up yet?
You want to take that? Yeah.
So, the way we're approaching this as a general rule is depending on the size, complexity, and I'm going to say velocity, how quick a procurement is going, then we have standardized, team size to do this. So that's how we're generally approaching this. So as we, for the procurement that we have currently under our responsibility, and then as our mandate grows, depending on what is asked of us, then we will be basing ourselves on those standards. So now it's important to understand that every project, every capability is different. Some of them are massive project in themselves. We're talking about the National Shipbuilding Strategy, for example. So we need to we're both going to have huge standards, but also take into account the complexity of the industry of the project to make sure that we appropriately serve the Canadian forces and Canadians.
I'd also add that Madame Drainville's leading the work, but the decision to move off of the 100 million, if we were to drop it to 75 or 50, before you make that decision, you've got to get your hands on what that means. How many projects? What does it imply in terms of people? Mm-hmm. Is that the right place for this group to have that leverage? Where should DND play? Because their limits for procurement are quite low today. And so where sizing the bigger team, I know you were asking at the team level, but sizing the bigger team and breaking down what does it imply for teams, because the bigger the procurement, the more efficient the team is in a fashion, because if the procurement's twice the size, you don't need twice as many people. Mm-hmm. And so Madame Drainville is leading the work on so that we can have an educated opinion to go back to government and say we think the right number is 100 or we think the right number is 75 or 50.
And in the end, I would, I'm not supposing, I understand that the end result is to reduce the red tape and the, one group tripping over another group whose mandate is often similar. So, is that correct?
Yeah, very much so.
What key objectives does the DIA hope to accomplish within the first year? Have there been, I know we talked about KPIs just a moment ago, but any key objectives Is there something, if there's a whiteboard in a boardroom somewhere saying we will hit these marks?
Did you want to? I see you're itching to go. So.
No, it's an excellent question. I think we talk a lot about like how like we want to speed up the delivery and we want to make sure that there's an impact for Canadians. But I think internally, following up on your previous question, is what we want is to be successful on onboarding not only projects but people into an agency that will definitely change the future with respect to how we procure capabilities, military capabilities for the Canadian Armed Forces, men and women that really need it. So one big goal for us, if I look at it from a fiscal year perspective, is to get to the 31st of March with like an organization that may not be at its end state because it will take time, but that is very clear on its culture, the values that they want to promote, how we will process files, how we will interact together but with others. I think definitely that's what we want to promote.
Good.
Thank you, Mr. Tranville. Thank you, Mr. Mallet. Mallet, I apologize. I know, it's only a matter of time. Monsieur Savard-Tremblay, I say that correctly. Over to you to 2.5 minutes.
Merci. Alors,
Thank you. You have quite the ambitious objective, reducing or working with exports that Canada makes. And Wendy Gilmore from the Canadian International Council, who is the former Secretary General of NATO for Defense Investment, she says that to reach this 50%, of increase of exports objective, Canada will have to engage controversial markets that are not natural allies, the Middle East, for instance. But we have seen that the Middle East is a powder keg, and it's in a precarious and even dangerous situation. So how, on the one hand, if you're trying to reach this export target, if you end up in working with these countries, how do you make sure that the tools and weapon systems and whatnot do not end in the wrong hands?
Yeah, so I think inevitably that's a case-by-case evaluation of the situation. Remember that our agency's role first and foremost is to buy, and so in the first step we're not selling anywhere. But I understand your question, which is, are we enabling something down the value chain that has bad implications as it relates to actors that we don't want to participate in? I think it's being aware of where the value chain goes and making judgments around the things that you believe are consistent with your laws and values, and that has to supersede the short-term financial or even longer-term financial considerations as a person or as an organization.
Est-ce qu'il y a des pays qui vont être un peu comme...
Are there countries that will be blacklisted? Countries with which we wouldn't want to do business?
Sure, there are. I suspect our GAC colleagues are better educated than I am, but I'm sure there are countries that we'd prefer not to deal with.
Vous avez vu hocher la tête. Vouliez-vous ajouter quelque chose là-dessus?
You were nodding. Would you like to add something? Well, I was going to say the same thing. We have GAC colleagues who would be better positioned for that question. But we're looking to increase exports by up to 50%. There are great opportunities with allies to do that. And if we put in the work, we believe that that will make a big difference, even before going to more controversial countries, as you mentioned.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
I'm just sensitive that the bells are going to ring, and I may have to interrupt you at that point, Mr. Kibble, to ask for consent to continue with this while the bells are ringing. Mr. Kibble, over to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. And Mr. Guzman, is there a firewall between Canada's new bilateral finance engagement with the Chinese Communist Party and the DIA and the DIA's financial network?
I'm not even familiar with the agreement, so I don't.
You don't think so? Do you think there should be?
I don't know the
Okay.
nature of the concern.
Almost every major platform in your procurement portfolio runs exclusively on Taiwanese semiconductors. Single point of failure. And I appreciate it can't be addressed in the short term. Has DIA modeled this dependency? And do you also feel the recently signed One China policy that Canada reaffirmed, will that affect the DIA's ability to engage directly with Taiwanese defense technology companies?
We've not modeled the
Okay.
chip chain.
Fair, thank you. Secretary Furr said Canada's last to the party regarding establishing a dedicated procurement body. We're here now. Have you done a written comparative analysis of the UK, Australia, or France's defense procurement agencies, looking at differences and areas to replicate and strengths and weaknesses that we can adopt here in Canada?
I don't think it's fair to hold me accountable for Secretary Furr's statements.
No, I absolutely quoted
I'm
him.
kidding. I'm kidding.
But I'm interested in
that work has been done. It has been done. It was done by DND in the run-up to the formation of the agency, and I'd be happy to share the
Thank you.
report. It's actually quite a good report.
Excellent. I look forward to that. Will you commit to a semi-annual appearance before the committee during the duration of your 3-year mandate to update us on where you're on track, gaps, your performance, and just sharing your lovely demeanor with us in committee?
Now you're nice to me.
Well, I'm asking you for something. So.
I don't know who controls the schedule and all of this. If people tell me I should show up, I'll show up. Happy to engage outside of this forum as well. I mean, if we really run out of time and you want my anecdotal observations on the process, I'd be happy to do that. Might be more suitable outside, but
fair.
I mean, the amount of time that gets spent preparing for these things and the benefit coming out is imbalanced.
China has been identified by CSIS and Five Eyes Partners as actively pursuing acquisition of Canadian technology, IP, et cetera, in all sectors that are relevant to DIA's mandate. Under what circumstances will the DIA flag supplier relationship, and I'm not talking just prime, but secondary, tertiary contracts, the relationship to CSIS or other investment or the Investment Canada Act National Security Review process, who in your organization will trigger that?
I thought you were going a different place.
Well, you can answer this first and then the other place.
Yeah, and I don't know if Mr. Robitaille has an answer. I'm not aware of the specific process that does that. Certainly, to the extent it comes to our attention, it should be flagged. We would do it. I thought you might be going somewhere else, which is not just China, but other countries,
absolutely,
including the United States, are crossing the border and taking equity stakes in our companies and our technologies and our IP. And I think as we develop the agency, there's certainly a concept of us being part of a government effort to do some of that. And so that we don't wake up and find out that 25% of a Canadian company with IP who's hit a liquidity crisis is now in U.S. hands, that we see that coming and have an ability to invest in it.
Fair, and I appreciate your understanding of it. Is there a dedicated team then within your organization to flag that and point that out?
I don't think specific team. Yeah, go for it.
I can provide you a little bit of insight on that. We are very conscious of the exposure that we will be facing, and obviously as we are transitioning the DIE as a special operating agency into a standalone entity, these will be taken into consideration, and we will have the controls and the people in place to be able to.
Taking considerations, but are you committing to having a team that's going to be dedicated to doing
Definitely.
that?
Actually, we are already in discussion with CSEC and CSIS about the way forward.
You have does the DIA have for Mr. Guzman, a dedicated legal counsel for ITAR and import control expertise embedded into the team?
Not embedded, right? Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Yes, we have legal advisor on multiple fronts, not just this one, but on many other topics. And yes, they are embedded into the team.
Thank you. And I have one last question if I have time. UK's National Audit Office produces an annual equipment or analysis that flags cost overruns and capability gaps, et cetera, and identifying them before they can become a public scandal. The PBO has a more limited mandate for real-time audit of capital programs. Would you commit today to supporting an annual independent capability audit, not just a financial audit, whether your programs are delivering the capability? And this would be, say, to Parliament for programs exceeding $1 billion, which is your mandate.
That I guess would be a group decision. That feels like something that adds to process. But to the extent that there's a concern that we should have the right governance over our activities, of course, we'll be open to whatever governance the collective opinion determines is the right thing to do. I'm reluctant to commit to, internal processes when the biggest part of our mandate right now is to be responsible, be fair, be transparent, color inside the lines, but to do it more efficiently.
No, your time, I'm sorry, is up, but I do want to address the members here to ask for unanimous consent. As you can see, the bells are ringing. We'll be voting in 20 odd minutes. So with your consent, we will proceed for the next 15 minutes or so, and we'll then adjourn the meeting at that point. So the next up is Mr. Watchorn. Over to you. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Guzman, to you, you have extensive experience in the private sector, and you have people working with you that have extensive experience in the public sector. Now, in engineering fields, when we want to reanalyze something, we try and get best practices. So I'd like you to explain some of the best practices that you've brought in to the DIA and some of the best practices that the government officials had brought in to make the whole process better.
Sure, I think so I'm a pretty straightforward person. What you see is what you get. I think a lot of it is just being able to critically look at how we've always done things and ask, can you do A or can you do B? And I've built businesses all in financial services. I've built businesses. I've led teams in Asia, led teams in Australia, led teams in Europe, led teams in the U.S. and in Canada, across the spectrum. And so there is a set of experiences and skills that just comes with business leadership, whether it's the same, the subject is not 100% relative to the leadership of a business, which is why you see the CEO of CIBC is now the CEO of TELUS, because presumably people think he can do a good job leading. And so that's my part of the puzzle, is to try to bring that experience from different environments. On the one hand, we are part of a very big civil service that has very entrenched processes and routines. On the other hand, we're a startup. I got a blank org chart. My org chart had 2 people not named but 2 levels and my box. And so, some of that is private sector, and then the experience that flanks me here is okay, Doug, that's a nice thing to aspire to, but let's try to get halfway there now, because we can do that in 3 weeks, and let's leave the other half for the next 3 weeks.
Okay. Now, we've been talking a lot about submarines today, but I'd like to hear some of the other projects you guys are working on and where you're at in the process of these projects.
Mr. Robitaille, you are on top of them all.
Yes, one area that's quite exciting is our project in the space field. In the introductory remark, Mr. Guzman spoke about the enhanced satellite communications project, for which we've signed a strategic partnership with Telesat. So this is quite exciting for Canada to have its own constellation, sovereign capability of telecommunications satellite, and for us and also our allies to be able to diversify their source of telecommunication. So it is groundbreaking, and it is like when we're talking about dual use technology, it's both going to meet the need of the Canadian Armed Forces, but will also create a capability where you can have better, for example, Wi-Fi connection on the plane, which many of us can complain about the lack of reliability. So that's going to be a big benefit. So those are I think this area is quite exciting. And there's also in the training field. So for and we have leaders like CAE that are leaders in the field internationally, both in the civil and the military side. So when we look at our future fighter lead-in program, we have a strategic partnership in this case with CAE. So to advance it, and by having those strategic partnership, we're able to by having that, it creates a closer relationship so that we can negotiate and advance faster to make this happen. And it also provides certainty for the Canadian industry. When they make investment, they know that there is that Canada is betting on them. And it's also, so it's allowed them to make the investment and also provide confidence for our allies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Hey, Mr. Watchorn, thank you so much. Ms. Gallant, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the witness, you mentioned that you have early interaction with industry to speed up the process. What about academia? or even departments, research departments within the Canadian government, like Canadian Nuclear Laboratories?
Yeah, I think as we build, we'll take advantage of whatever expertise we can find inside or outside. The primacy of the supply chain is, though, because that'll help us make the actual procurement decision more effective. Understanding what Canada can supply and what non-Canadians can supply. It also, quite importantly, provides them a signal with where we're going. And so it allows the private sector to make capital allocation decisions in the normal course of their business with more predictability and therefore be there when we need them. So that's why we start by talking about the supply chain, but certainly open to input from any level of expertise in the country.
And what exactly do you mean by modernizing? We've seen comments about modernizing the workforce, and what we've come to learn is that really means cutting jobs. So what does it mean in your department?
I think it's a lot of what we've talked about around the table, which is, renovating the process is what I call it, doing things differently, running things in parallel that used to run in sequence. Part of it is getting more output for whatever the size of the team is, and being more efficient at delivering for the CAF and delivering for Canadians. But renovating the process is perhaps how I think about it.
And Mr. Chair, I'll be handing the rest of my time over to Mr. Bazan.
How much time do I have?
You have 3-4 minutes.
Okay, good. So just want to follow up on that cost, that last question, because you're talking about, processes, streamlining, get out of the sequential and things at a parallel time. You also mentioned earlier that the DIA isn't costing taxpayers any more for the administration of the agency because they're taking resources from other departments. So can you point to corresponding decreases in spending in the other departments that
well, there's the accounting piece of it, and then there's the people piece of it. But to the extent that we've moved,
you moved people over, but was there a
Smith
corresponding decrease
from
on the other side?
Yeah, because we moved the work. So PSPC, we've moved the project. When we moved the submarine project to DIA, we moved the.
So how many staff were moved over, as an example?
I don't know the project by project, but we're at 130 people.
Okay.
Of which
130 total. So there's
been
a corresponding decrease of 130 people from PSPC, or are they still PSPC employees?
No, they physically moved, moved.
Okay. So what's the entire budget then of DIA for this year?
So this year, the entire budget is 8.7 million. So mainly in operational funding, which is for the day-to-day operation, not in salary. We were not granted any funding in salary. The main purpose of that was to make sure that we leverage resources that already exist in PSPC and other departments and bring them over within DIA with their own salary. At this stage, because we are still a special operating agency, we made an agreement with all those other departments.
So it's not going to show up in the estimates at all?
No.
Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you for that, because we were wondering where those numbers were. So you talked about doing business with and trying to diversify away from the U.S. primes. And we do have Canadian prime defense industries as well. But one of the complaints that we often hear is that the small, medium enterprises, especially those new innovators, are having trouble getting through the front door of Government of Canada, especially at D&D. What are you going to do different to ensure that our SMEs are talked about research, DRDC in particular, providing an opportunity for SMEs to collaborate with. What are you doing to make sure that they have the opportunity to sell what they're producing, especially in the rapidly changing defense world?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And there's too many front doors to government. We've offered, we're not staff for it right now, but we've offered that we could play a role in steering those enterprises to different places of government. We don't aspire to absorb the capabilities and role of a BDC or the regional authorities or all the arms of government that deal with small and medium-sized enterprise. But as a newcomer, it's obvious that we need to get better organized around it. So, it's on the long list of things that we think we can play a role in, but being a coordinating function for those of sort of a first port of call for manufacturers, we would actively manage relationships at the larger end, because that's an opportunity, I think, for government as well. We have not historically connected the dots completely with something that this prime's doing on this part of government.
But I hope you can appreciate time is of the essence. That's why you're trying to speed up the procurement timeline. But as you get your threat level briefings from CAF and Department of National Defense, and you look at conflict around the world and how even Ukraine is going more and more into drones and robotics on winning that fight against Russia, certainly you can appreciate it. It's going to be those innovators, those ones with the, bringing up new entrepreneurial ideas that we need to employ as quickly as possible.
Either I should do this or whoever else.
They do it for you.
I think a group activity around that sovereign list of capabilities is, as I was saying earlier, is to turn them sideways and between us and DND and perhaps I said, come up with a coherent strategy around each of those capabilities, which is a key step to being able to do what you're saying.
Thank you, Mr. Guzman. Mr. Bazan, I got one question, Mr. Raminato. I think, because we're going to have to adjourn soon.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to have my 5 minutes. I know we still have another 15 before the bell, so I do have some questions for Mr. Guzman.
Let's proceed then.
Thank you. Further to my colleague's question, so part of the defense industrial strategy includes something along with respect to Borealis and the DISH, the Defense Innovation Secure Hubs, that I know that Department of National Defense is working closely with your team. And I think it's the great opportunity for us to marry the expertise of research-intensive universities with the startup SMEs, with CAF, and put them in secure locations with the necessary clearance to solve some of the issues that we are having in a secure environment. And I think this is the first time I think that Canada is doing something in this regard. So I know that we are working very closely together, Mr. Guzman, between the defense portfolio and your portfolio on that. With respect to procurement, we could have, I'm going to just premise this with, I may be the parliamentary secretary for national defense, but I'm also the mother of serving members. So we can have all of the submarines and planes and so on that we need, but if we don't have the people and they don't have the equipment and they're not feeling the support of their government, it would be moot. Now, I know that the threshold currently for the DIA is contracts above 100 million, but once we've had the opportunity to create whatever the agency will be, whether it be a crown corporation or a standalone department or whatever, is the goal that once the machinery is working to lower that threshold, to look at some of the projects and the funding and procurement we need for things that are much more basic to the troops. So for instance, often I'm hearing about boots. I know that probably it is not as interesting as submarines, but these are the things that matter to the troops, whether it be the living quarters, whether it be the air conditionings in the PMQs and so on and so forth. Is the goal to eventually reduce the threshold for contracts so that the DIA, once up and running, is managing all defense procurement and all defense procurement contracts? Is that the goal?
That's not on the radar screen at the moment. As you observed, we're at 100 and up. D&D's, I think it's 7.5. There's a lot of room between 7.5 and 100. And so who does the area in the middle? If there is an area in the middle, is that PSPC? Can you imagine a world where you get to only 2 players and there's a line somewhere between the 2 of us? This group is probably better educated than I am as to what D&D is doing in respect of boots and Arctic gear and all of that. But I certainly feel like the intensity of solving those needs is much higher. It feels like it's a lot higher than it used to be, although I've only been here for a little while. But that, for the foreseeable future, is going to have to be D&D led.
Thank you very much, and thank you to your team as well.
Thank you, Mr. Raminato. Thank you to our witnesses. Mr. Guzman, we wish you well in the role, recognizing how important it is to expedite these matters quickly, support the defense of Canada, but at the same time promote our economic well-being. So kudos on that score. Big job to take, and we appreciate what you and your team are about to do and continue to do. And with that, to the members, we do have to go up and vote. So do we have unanimous consent to adjourn? Meeting's adjourned.